Now our first presenter is our friend Roman Zhovtulya, who is the IT director of WAIS. And Roman has, I don't know how many times I've called him to wake him up in the middle of the night with tech problems, and he's always on call and always helpful. And Roman designed he and his team at the Web Service Center company designed our present website, as well as our mobile apps and all sorts of other technological marvels that we have in the new WAIS internet presence. Roman is from Ukraine. He's from the city of Lutsk, which is in western Ukraine, and he will be telling us about developments in Ukraine with the assistance of his father. What is your father's name?
Eugene.
His father, Eugene, who is in Lutsk and will be standing by and will be with us via Skype. And we'll have time afterwards for questions. And following Roman, our chair, Cameron Sawyer, will talk to us about current developments in Russia, which change every day. So first we'll start with Roman. Thank you.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here. Let's see if I can move away from the screen. So this is going to be a very strange talk for me, because I usually talk about high-tech, internet, singularity and futurism, stuff like that, but I'm not going to talk about any of that. In fact, I'm never even going to mention about the Hyperloop, which is a fifth mode of transportation that was proposed by Elon Musk. He said you can go to LA in 45 minutes. It will be 1/10 the cost of high-speed rail here. I'm also not going to say anything about the self-driving car and the revolution in transportation that's coming with it. So no traffic, no accidents, no parking. You don't need to buy a car anymore. So give it about 5-10 years, and mark my words, it'll be cheaper to have a taxi that you can summon with your phone. Thank you. Let's see. Yeah, I'm never going to mention anything about Bitcoin or blockchain, which is the first decentralized cryptocurrency, which currently has about $3.4 billion market capitalization. Smart contracts, which are self-executing and self-enforcing, that you can basically set up anything on that. And actually, there was a blockchain marriage. Somebody married on.
Which stack?
Yeah, so I'm not talking about that, you remember? I'm also not going to mention the WAIS 4 mobile app that you can now, as of about 2 months ago, right, download and install on any of the internet connected devices, and you can comment, read the post, search, basically have most of the functionality you have on the website from your iPhone, Android device, tablet, or HTML5 capable device. Or our newest project, which is PikeWise Online Dictionary of Idioms, which we have just almost finished entering 2,000 entries in 5 languages or 40 categories. It's still about 5% to go. Been at it for a couple of months now. You can access it through the web. But what I will talk about, and this is kind of strange because I usually have a very sarcastic view on that, my former life. So I grew up in one of the former Soviet state republics. My parents were pretty poor. My grandparents actually fought, and a lot of my relatives fought Russians and Nazis at the same time, which was a stupid idea, but well, that was their propaganda. That's what I thought they were right. Of course, they lost. The Ukrainian insurgent army is the keyword you can use to kind of look at that part of the sad Ukrainian history. I was fortunate enough to be invited to participate at in Canada-Ukraine parliamentary program, which gave me an opportunity to study and learn as an intern, as a political intern in the House of Commons in Ottawa. And then I participated in Orange Revolution in European countries. So I was in Germany, and we traveled a lot to France, to Brussels. Sorry, 2004 I meant to say, not 2014. What is Ukraine? So Ukraine is actually in the center of Europe, in case you didn't know. The geographic center of Europe is somewhere in Carpathian Mountains, if I remember correctly. It is the largest country in Ukraine. By the way, no article "the." So Ukraine is...
Roman, I didn't use the, did I?
Yes, I don't remember. A lot of people do, so...
I made an effort not to use
right.
the. I hope it didn't slip out.
That's no problem. This is, as you see, a lot of this is a bit of tongue-in-cheek here, but Ukraine is the biggest country in Europe, by far. France is the second, and so on. So let me tell you, a Cliff Notes story of those who are from the haven't followed kind of. In late, early 90s, the Soviet Union collapsed, and a lot of these independent countries submerging Ukraine, out of which Ukraine was one of those, had a peaceful transition, and then 10, 20 years down the road, people were still impoverished and a lot of corruption. In the meantime, they gave up the third largest nuclear arsenal. That's what Ukraine had. We're going to talk about that later. And they went through a number of puppet governments. And Ukrainians are pretty hard to really, they're very patient. It's very hard to get them angry. But it happened in 2014. So finally, Ukrainians were really fed up with corruption, a bunch of empty promises, and what really started it all, it was the Euromaidan. That's what actually led to the whole developments in Ukraine. Right now, the Yanukovych, which was a Russian puppet president at that time, he led everybody to believe that he's going to sign this EU association agreement. He backed out in the last minute, so people were just outraged. So there was this video. I don't know if you want to see the videos, guys. There's a bunch of stuff. See if we can try this here. There was a lot of very interesting. Oh, I think I forgot. There's something wrong with sound here. No. Okay. Let's try a different way. So, the internet is not cooperating. Anyway, we'll come back to it.
Yeah, maybe we can get it later, Roman.
Yeah. All right. So there are a bunch of videos that people made to appeal to Control L. Okay. The world citizenry to help them with this problem. And the problem was corrupt Russian puppet government that had the Russian interest at heart, and they didn't care about Ukraine. So we made a statement, right? About 800,000 people, some say more. So we did this, right? And I guess they didn't get the message. This was in the winter. This was pretty cold. Almost 1 million people poured in the streets of Kiev, right? And the government said, we don't care. And then, so they sent the police, with all this stuff. And Ukrainians, as patient as they were, said, okay, well, maybe we can kind of work these things out. I mean, we were pretty pretty angry and aggravated, and we've suffered a lot. But let's see if we can work it out. Maybe this way we can work it out. So there was actually a very famous guy that they brought a piano, and he was playing to these riot police. Very interesting stuff. And there were plenty of Lenin statues throughout the Ukraine at that point. So the last warning was, over the course of a couple of days, most of them fell down throughout Ukraine. And even in like the most Russian-influenced cities in eastern Ukraine. I guess the government still didn't get the message, so people took to the local city councils and basically took over. And they said, okay, well, now Yanukovych said, well, if you want to play it hard way, we can do some real damage. So they invited elite snipers, and those snipers started shooting unarmed protesters, with hopes that they would sort of back up and the whole thing would kind of die down as it happened before. I'm not sure whose idea that was, but it didn't work out. In fact, people got so angry that, and this was actually, they shot over 100 people, those snipers did, over the course of a couple of days. So this was pretty gruesome. And then, Ukrainians are pretty patient, but, patience ends at some point. So the last straw was that the opposition, there was a couple of people, including Klitschko, that sort of went to the Ukrainian government, to Yanukovych, who was the guy in power at the point and the time. He said, okay, well, we have to do something. Let's make an agreement so it doesn't escalate any further. So they agreed that the Yanukovych will remain in power for another year, and he would make some, he would sign this EU association agreement and so on. Right. So these three, Klitschko and other two guys, they didn't really get what the Ukrainians on the street wanted. When they heard that agreement, and that was, when Klitschko came on stage and said, "Look, guys, I think we finally solved it. We're," and there's video with them shaking hands. People were just outraged. They say, "This guy killed my brother. His snipers killed 100 people." There were, the Russia, and basically everybody understood that was strings pulled by Russia, by Putin, and those people are responsible for all the, and it went back to 50, 100 years ago. Those people are responsible for death of 10 million Ukrainians in starvation and other places. So this stuff goes back, so the whole situation was so overheated that one of the centurions, and I think I'll see if we can get this video later. One of the right after that announcement that they made an agreement with the government, he comes on stage as 26-year-old guy who commands a kind of 100-person unit of self-defense unit on the Maidan, on the street. He comes up, he says, and if we have one line here, I can show you the video. Basically comes on the stage and says, "Look, I don't care what you guys signed. You shook hands with this murderer, and there's no way that he's staying another year in power. If he's not out of there by 10 a.m., we take up arms and we go storm his palace." That basically was his message, and people were pretty serious. So by morning, Yanukovych basically fled and left over his palace. You probably heard of all these pictures. You can see that later. There's huge. There was a huge outcry. So basically, he fled to Russia and surfaced there in Rostov, I think, a couple of weeks later, or a week later. So his legacy was that he stole about $80 billion in 3 years. In 3 years in Ukraine, killed hundreds, so that's where we are now. So Putin said, well, this Yanukovych thing, what they say. If you're any dictator worth their weight, you should do it yourself. If you want to get it done, do it yourself. So pretty soon Putin said, okay, I'll do it myself, and he basically started sending these little green men that they were unidentified military, basically soldiers with a bunch of modern hardware showing up everywhere in eastern Ukraine. Started with Crimea, of course. They parachuted a bunch of troops there. There was like tanks driving. This is like a normal street, right? And you wake up and then there's this Russian convoy. And Putin said, no, that's not us, right? Somebody else. I have no idea. And there was some jokes on the internet say, all the Russian Russian soldiers when they go to Crimea for vacation, they take their tanks with them. That was their explanation.
Roman, excuse me, is this Crimea or Eastern Ukraine in the picture?
I believe this was Eastern Ukraine somewhere. Yeah, they parachuted. There's no. They couldn't get into Crimea because there's no direct route for. But they parachuted a bunch of people, a bunch of stuff, and basically what? Yeah. So this was Eastern. This was later, and yeah. So a lot of you didn't know that most of the Soviet high tech was made in Ukraine. So the world's largest airplane, I think, it was the An-225 was made in Kiev. All the fancy Russian ICBMs, all the high-tech stuff, navigation system was made in Dnipropetrovsk on this huge they employed over 13,000 people. Yuzhmash in Russian, Pivdenno-Mash in Ukrainian. It's a huge military. Jet engines for all these were made in Zaporizhia. One of the largest jet sort of engine makers in Europe, as far as I remember. So what I'm talking about. So of course Putin wanted to have control, since now he kind of losing control over Ukraine, right, and all those, and a lot of the high-tech stuff that went into Russian missiles and stuff came from Ukraine. Even now, a lot of their navigation and guidance systems. So Putin came up with this. I don't know whose brilliant idea that was, but they basically said, okay, look, we have a humanitarian crisis in eastern Ukraine, so let's send some aid. I don't have a picture here, but basically they sent a bunch of white trucks under the Red Cross, and they said, "Oh, this is humanitarian aid for those people that are suffering, in eastern Ukraine." But basically, the idea was to steal all the equipment for these high-tech. So they can, for these high-tech rockets and ICBMs from Dnipropetrovsk and Donetsk, from those planets. And they did, I think, 4 or 5 runs with these huge convoys of trucks. That was about a year ago. All right, so this is what we have kind of in general. So Russia annexed Crimea pretty quickly. There was no fighting from Ukrainians because the media said, "Oh, it's going to be a very uneven fight. It's going to be 1 to 100. Russian strength, military strength, about 100 times more. Russia is 100 times more powerful than Ukraine. There's no point. So just give up." So they occupied Crimea. They occupied a bunch of stuff and a bunch of land in eastern Ukraine. Right now, it's about twice the area of Israel what they occupied. Yeah. So overall, there were the whole little aggression there cost about 8,000 lives so far. There were about official numbers, 1.5 million refugees. Inside of, Ukraine has moved from about 1.5 to 3 unofficial numbers were more than double that number. They moved from eastern and Crimea, those parts, to western and central Ukraine. So pretty large migration, pretty large sort of refugee. And the war in Ukraine costs about $20 million a day, every day. And don't get me started about all the stuff they bombed and all the, it's not, yeah. Right, so Budapest Memorandum. So let me channel my inner James Spader now. There was a very interesting TV show called Boston Legal, and he was very articulate about similar matters in the U.S. So basically, he said he was very sarcastic. So basically, so there was this Budapest Memorandum signed in '94, I believe, '95. Ukraine had a third largest nuclear armament arsenal in the world, and they basically said, okay, we're going to give it up, but we need some security assurances. And basically that's what US, UK, and Russia signed, and that turned out to be a lie. And Ukrainians were pretty upset, to say the least, and they basically, there was this big message, and somewhere that, because world didn't do it much, right? At least initially, they didn't really a lot of sympathizers, but there was no help whatsoever. I think there was some money, but it was very there was a message, Ukraine, to the world: do something or shut up. We don't need your empathy. We trusted you. We gave up our nukes, and you promised to. Actually, territorial integrity was one of the key conditions there, right? So I guess now I understand why some of the people from Central America have kind of the same or similar attitude to U.S. as we have to Russia and Ukraine. Anyway, so Putin plans. What's he up to? He's been talking a lot about the new Russian world order. Basically, it's a resurrection of Soviet Union, right? He wants to be a big Tsar and everything. But it's even more importantly that he's destabilizing a lot of democratic institutions. He's sending support, money, all kinds of support to these neo-Nazis and other parties in Europe, in all kinds of European countries. So bribing politicians, you heard about the Schroeder. That he works. I don't know what what his current situation is, but he basically got a pretty high-paying job. At Gazprom, right? The Russian. So that's there. Yeah, he's been supporting terrorists in Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine. But ultimately, that's clash of civilizations and values, right? Are we gonna, is the Western world gonna kind of sit back and that certainly did look like that initially, right? The Ukrainians were once again left on their own to defend against that threat to democratic values, because after all, Ukrainians are European. They're much more European nation than other nations, I would say, culturally, in sort of east of Ukraine. So I can see what are some of the future options there. So if you remember, oil price is very interesting. We talked about it yesterday. Some people said that it really doesn't have anything to do with what's going on in Russia. However, a very similar situation happened in the 80s, right, when Soviet Union collapsed. It took about 5 years. They had a big chunk in their budget for raw materials and oil, right? Soviet Union did. Russia is very similar. About 70% of Russian GDP comes from oil and other. And they started a war, right? So Afghanistan was a big fail also for Soviet Union, and Syria right now seems to be, and all these other wars seem to be the same problem for Russia. So one option would be collapse of Russia in the same way Soviet Union collapsed, because in fact Russia itself is not a sort of not uniform.
Ethnically diverse.
Yeah, not monolithic country. Yeah, so there's in fact over the past 300 years, Russia has increased its size, total area by about 1,000 times, and that's not. It was not done by signing agreements and sort of, but it was basically a military taking over somebody else's territory. So all those little republics and everything is still there. So there's option 2 would be assassination of Putin by his inner circle, right? So that's exactly what happened with Stalin, from what I understand. He was poisoned. I don't know if that's conspiracy theory or fact, but basically the idea is that his inner circle is getting pretty tired. All these oligarchs, they got their businesses are suffering, and they cannot go to Paris and other places, so it's getting on their nerves. So the guy like Putin is really lowering their quality of life. So it's not inconceivable to think that they will do something about it. And maybe option 3 would be the least problematic for the rest of the world. Right, so what's interesting is that we have some really good developments. So Mikhail Saakashvili actually is the former president of Georgia, is now Ukrainian in Ukraine. He's governing the Odessa region. He's well known for cleaning up Georgia, because Georgia had very corrupt, there was corruption on every level. And when you watch some of his videos, you can see that this guy is ruthless with corrupt, he's able to figure out how all these corrupt under table processes go, and he's not going to stand by that and watch, and there's no way. So there's some progress. Julie Marishevska, the guy, a girl from the video that maybe we'll see now, from the I'm Ukrainian video, is his press secretary, so that's a good team. And since Putin kind of got his military appetite in Syria, the fighting in eastern Ukraine has virtually stopped. So I think it's getting a little better. If you'd like to have more information, I'd suggest Timothy Snyder. He's a pretty good analyst. He's a professor at one of the universities on the East Coast. I forgot which one, but he's really trying to think through. His focus is Central Europe, especially Ukraine developments there, political science. Ukraine Today is the Ukrainian answer to Russia Today, RT. So you can try that. Pravda is, if you read Ukrainian, I think they have some translation in English as well. This is where I get my news. And if you have any questions. So this is not really my day job, as you can see, but you can ask me anything later at webservicecenter.net, Roman at webservicecenter.net. At my own company, I empower startups and do process optimization with our own web apps and do consulting. So now I have a question. Yes, we'll get to the questions in a second. This talk, thumbs up, down, or what do you think? Yeah? All right, thank you. So I have a special treat for you. My dad is standing by for Q&A. So we'll see if the Skype gods, the internet gods, cooperate. And he'll be talking through there. You should be able to. Let me give him a call.
Let me put a plug in for Roman's company. If you have any IT needs, get in touch with him.
That's a movie plug, John. The Spanish thing calls for marketing.
All right, let's see. Алло, что ты надо?
Да, я чую.
Может, okay. So I guess let me give you all background.
Може я виключу один?
Are we gonna get to see your dad?
No, I don't think he has a camera.
Зараз працюють, добре.
Так, добре.
А?
Чую так.
Тоді все нормально.
So my dad. So we thought, okay, who else going to be better in answering questions about the current developments in Ukraine than somebody who never left the country? Well, shortly he left for a couple of weeks. But basically he lived here the rest of most of his life, all of his life in Ukraine. He never lived anywhere else, and he is a very. He's been following the developments there over. Since the independence, even before. So he should be able to tell you. He might even have some questions to you after your questions to kind of. Yeah.
What's the current status of
Okay. Перше питання, яка зараз на сьогодні ситуація теперішня в Україні?
Ну, вже тиждень військові дії не ведуться.
So almost a week now, the fighting has stopped.
Вибори, які на сході оголосили, перенесли на лютий місяць, відмовилися. Просили від сепаратистів звільнити зовсім, але вони перенесли ніби на лютий місяць. Тобто хочуть шантажувати далі.
So the separatists that are controlled by.
На сьогоднішній день на фронті спокійно воно. Там десь такі провокують, то снарядом запустили в наш блокпост, то з стрілецькою зброєю провокували, щоб наші відповіли, а вони потім звернуть вину на наші війська, що вони не дотримуються.
So aside from constant provocations on the side of the Russian controlled separatists, most of it is almost no shooting. They have the standard trick. They start shooting at Ukrainian posts there in hopes that they would fall for they would provoke them, and they would shoot back, and then they would say, "Look, these Ukrainians, they break the ceasefire." Yes.
What, if any, or anybody's doing to exploit the situation where we're more towards peace or lasting peace than going to war? Is there anybody?
You mean exploiting in terms of?
This is an opportunity for peace in that place. Is there anybody standing forward? Hey, you guys can permanently not shoot at each other.
Right. If there's any international
Ukraine or from anybody.
The sad part
Наступне питання. Чи є якісь міжнародні зусилля для заспокоєння тої ситуації? Щоб
Звичайно, Європа, і Сполучені Штати, і Канада, в принципі, весь цивілізований світ підтримує Україну. Все-таки Путін виконав ті мінські угоди, війна в Україні припинилася. Недавно зустрічалися в Парижі Путін, Меркель і Порошенко та Нормандська. І домовилися, що будуть виконувати мінські зобов'язання. Іначе на Росію накладуть додаткові ще більше санкцій. Світ досить активно підтримує Україну, надає фінансову допомогу Україні. Міжнародний валютний фонд, програма є надання допомоги до 40 мільярдів доларів. Тобто цих кілька років підтримати українську економіку. І санкції проти Росії теж вже мають свої негативні наслідки для Росії. Курс впав рубля, і ціни підскочили і так далі, безробіття. Плюс запровадили ще блокаду Криму. Ви знаєте, що недавно не пускають туди товари.
Я зараз перекладу.
Let
me see if I can translate all this.
A lot to remember there.
Yeah. So basically, the Western world is trying now. Currently, is actually there are a lot of negotiations, peace talks, and there were 2 or 3 rounds of these so-called Minsk agreements, where a bunch of ceasefire agreements and so on. That Putin violated. The first 2 or 3 were violated. Now he seems to be a little more serious about it. There's a lot of financial support, seems to be I think $40 billion were promised by IMF or something like that, if I remember correctly, for rebuilding.
But then,
yeah.
Isn't the agreement, the Minsk agreement, as I understand it,
right,
is part of it is that the Ukraine will give special status to Donetsk, I forget how to pronounce it, but
Donetsk Republic, yes.
But they would give them a veto power over anything Kiev would decide to do. And that Merkel and co are trying to for peace, they're trying to force the Ukrainians to accept this. Have they accepted that?
Ще питання. Мінські угоди, невже частиною Мінських угод є умова, що Україна має дати право вето цим всім Донецьким і Луганським республікам, вето тих законів, які Київ має приймати. Чи то правда, чи Захід змушує Україну на такі поступки?
Мінськ-2, угоди Мінськ-2 були підписані в Мінську тоді, коли Україна потерпіла найбільшу поразку від російської армії. Це і Іловайський котел, там Дебальцево і так далі. Тоді треба було терміново добитися якогось миру, щоб Україна могла укріпити свої збройні сили. І Путін скористався цим і написав текст таких мінських Мінськ-2 до угод Мінськ-2 таким чином невиразно написав, що можна трактувати і так, і так. Кожен пункт можна трактувати. І сьогодні ті пункти Україна трактує так, а Росія трактує по-другому.
То Захід спонукає Україну підписувати ті пункти чи ні?
Що підписувати?
Чи дотримуватись тих угод?
Так, Захід каже, що дотримання цих угод є, іншої альтернативи сьогодні немає. Виходу з кризи, виконання Мінських угод. Але виконання Мінських угод Путін розуміє по-своєму, а Україна і Захід розуміє по-своєму. Що мають бути вибори, але вибори за українськими законами. І коли виведуть війська, Росія виведе техніку війська, і коли розброяться сепаратисти, тоді Україна так вважає Захід, що тоді можна проводити вибори.
Окей.
І ті майже 3 мільйона цих осіб переміщених, які виїхали з тих територій, теж повинні мати право голосувати, тобто повинні голосувати.
Okay, so second Minsk agreement basically was written during the time when Ukraine has suffered a lot of loss. The Russians were basically all over there, and those points were written specifically very vaguely, so they can be double interpreted in different ways. So Russia interprets it one way, and of course, yes, the answer to the question is yes. The Western powers, the Germany, the France are forcing Ukraine to abide by those agreements, but the agreements are not clear, not very clear. So
They're forcing them to abide by it as the Russians interpret it. Really good.
Питання ще, Захід змушує Україну дотримуватись тих умов за російською інтерпретацією чи за українською?
Ну, в основному за українською інтерпретацією.
Okay, Ukraine. Mainly Ukrainian version. So apparently Russia is losing its power now. So yeah. All right. Well.
Okay, we have time for one final question. I'm going to try to stick on schedule more or less today.
Good luck.
More or less.
Good luck.
I could you answer that quickly? Is there discussion now in the West to still with their eye on the goal of EU membership to divide the country and sort of let the Russian speaking part of the East just kind of do its thing and the Western part kind of form a small nation and become part of the EU?
Very good question. Джон питає, чи проводиться надалі, чи є така ідея розділити Україну на західно-східну, хай східна там з Росією, а західна буде частиною Європи.
Такі розмови ведуться і на різних рівнях, і на побутовому рівні, і на рівні політичному.
The talks are a lot of levels. These kind of talks are held on different levels.
Але це тільки розмови.
But it's just talks.
Державна політика, що Україна є єдина держава.
The state politics of Ukraine is the official position is Ukraine is cannot be divided. All the foreign military occupation should be removed. That's the official state line of Kiev, official Kiev. Well, if there is nothing else, I appreciate. Yes, one more.
Yes, General.
What about the American forces that they have in the western part of Ukraine now? I think they got some like
training.
16s or something there. What do they feel about that? What are they going to do?
Are you sure there is F-16 there?
There's a bunch of, they're basically there for training, General.
What?
They're basically there for training.
Well, that's what they say.
But I mean, basically, if you look at the kind of people going in and things, for the most part, they're there for training. I'm not saying they're not there for other things, but their primary
військової
purpose.
допомоги. Десь F-16 там були, якісь американські солдати приїжджали, яка там зараз ситуація?
Ну, F-16 це тільки в Польщі, в Східній Європі.
Okay, he's saying
F-16 немає.
there is no F-16s in Ukraine, it's only in Poland. However, there are American trainers, instructors that train the Ukrainian army in Lviv. There's always training going
Офіційно не говорять про це, але такі є чутки, що готують українських вояків, солдатів користуватися американською технікою.
There are also rumors that Ukrainian soldiers are are trained
Америка дає.
to use American weaponry. Finally, the America is
Україна просить найбільше просить
starting to give. Sorry.
They sent some weapons.
Yes, finally, recently they did. Yeah. Javelins, I think some of the javelins.
Поки що не погоджуються. Хоча ніби щось там вже підписав в бюджеті на 2016 рік.
2000 budget of 2016, $300 million.
Україні, і в тому числі і летальна зброя буде надана.
Lethal weapons were for 2016 budget. The U.S. budget 2016 seems to include $300 million for lethal weapons to Ukraine for Ukraine. But that's just rumor, so I don't know.
All right, well, tell дякую to.
Всі дуже дякують за відповіді.
Будь ласка.
Будемо продовжувати.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Roman.